All right. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I was just sitting there thinking, many years ago when I started doing film titles, I was talking to a director about the typeface, and he stopped mid-sentence and was like, you know, people who care this much about typography are a little sick. So I'm very happy to be among brethren. Good morning, America. How are ya? Nice use of Frakturschrift from Carolyn Hatton for the Women's March on Washington. This piece is made of cloth, applique, hand-cut letters, and embroidery on cotton. Welcome also to the Hairmageddon. This is a piece from the painter Hans Vici with Rachel Karen and Mary Beth Nelson for the Women's March in New York. This is oil painting with digital printing. What I want to do in this talk is just kind of look at the pulse of the country, just to say this is where we are, but I want to look at it a little bit through the lens of typographic choice. As the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, said, all politics are local. Here we have hand-drawn letters, marker, paint on poster board. It's up to you to figure out what typefaces these are. I have no idea. Typography embodies voice. Typography images those who are speaking. In this time, when every activist group has access to digital tools, typesetting, and cheap printing, remember how hard typesetting used to be? Why is this mode of digital processing, digital working, why is it being eschewed? Practically nobody is using those tools. Clean type and legibility are definitely not primary factors. This is spray paint, enamel, and stencil on foam core. Any aesthetic choice that even has the remote aroma of power or institutional voice is being abandoned. No one wants their voice to be framed in the visual language of big business, mega corporations, banks, or commerce. This piece is fake leather, satin, dotted Swiss fabric, hand-cut letters sewn and glued to cloth. The 1% is just beginning to understand that the reason Occupy Wall Street made no demands was that Occupy Wall Street was not talking to the 1%. The 99% are speaking and listening to each other. This is a quote from 8 editorial, the Occupied Wall Street Journal from November 2011. This kind of conversation is horizontal conversation. At this moment in time, there's a lot of discussion, especially from younger generations, around the idea of horizontal conversation as opposed to vertical conversation. And I think the use of typographic forms, which we are seeing, actually reflects a horizontal conversation. This is Tempera paint on cardboard. Knit bombing is popular. Though this is not letter-based, I think it's a great gesture. This is the Charging Bull near Wall Street, which was covered in crochet by the artist Olek. Horizontal communication places people in equivalent hierarchical positions and enhances problem solving, collaboration, and conflict resolution. A message to each other: tear down the invisible walls that separate by wealth. A message to each other: tear down the invisible walls that separate by race. Here again, we see cloth letters, applique, and embroidery on cloth. Then there's always more paint on poster board. A message to each other: we want substance in place of popularity. Paint on fabric. I do need to say, given the urgency and very serious consequences at stake in each of these movements, I hesitate to speak about all the artifacts represented here through mere aesthetics. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about their look, their graphic impact, or the font used. This is embroidery on a clergy mantle. I'm just going through a series of like contemporary movements, just to sort of give an overview of what they are using to represent their voice as far as typography is concerned. This is the Dakota Access Pipeline, DAPL. They used fabric paint and applique on fabric, a lot of fabric. More Standing Rock messaging, paint on canvas, paint on poster board, paint on cloth. Decolonize. Here we see movements starting to talk to each other and for each other to heighten, again, this idea of horizontal communication. This piece is from Decolonize in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux. Originally, Decolonize did adopt a logo and look that were very reminiscent of late 20th century activism, only to let go of it. This was Decolonize in a protest at the Brooklyn Museum. Decolonize abandoned that strategy as they began to work with other organizations. This is another version of a Decolonize banner. It's hand-cut letters on fabric. We see such tactics also present in the immigrant reform movement. This is actress Catherine Kavari at the premiere of Big Little Lies in Hollywood. It's embroidered typography on a dress. Stenciled letters and paint on cardboard. Immigration reform, of course, also bleeds into the No Wall movement. Hand-painted letters on Bristol board, hand-painted bricks and stenciled letters on canvas. And in an effort to give the other side some play, I wouldn't want to be biased or anything. This is the Build the Wall. These are earrings by Brave New Look, silver-plated charms with crystal borders. Climate change, we're in the climate change. Barbara, sorry, didn't get that poster in here. Someone suggested to me that people weren't using or aren't using typical typographic and printing methods because of it still takes time to get a banner produced, or it still takes money to get printouts. My response to that is, do you know how long that takes? To do a fucking needlepoint poster? Oh my God. So, given the time, labor, money equation present here, I don't think that's the reason. Here we have letters cut from found posters and sewed to cloth. All this work actually does remind us of the sort of idea of the politics of decorative arts. Handcrafts, traditionally identified with the feminine, are often associated with the language of the oppressed, the repressed, and the unrepresented. And these are just really cute handmade bees with talk bubble wings. This piece was made by Catalina Antonio Granados and her mother. It was produced as part of a protest exhibition at NYU by a student group called DEPT, D-E-P-T, which is the abbreviation for department. It was a group formed by women of color in the NYU BFA program. As this piece kind of brings us into academia, I want to also bring up the idea of the conversation of intersectionality, which seems to be a relatively omnipresent force and conversation in the university setting. This banner was done as part of the Depth protest exhibition at NYU, but you'll notice the message is decolonized. So you see this cross-breeding between different movements and messages. This is intersectionality at work. Intersectionality is a concept often used in critical theories to describe the ways in which oppressive institutions, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, xenophobia, classism, and so on, are interconnected and cannot be examined separately from one another. It gains power from horizontal influence, not vertical influence. This is Alt-Fact Kelly, and I really like her sign. Intersectionality is the methodology of studying the relationships among multiple dimensions and modalities of social relationships and subject formations. Thank goodness for the gays. They're always game to bring a little humor to the table. Make America gay again. Though this is a computer imprinter, although a computer imprinter was used to make this piece, in this case, I do feel that typography itself harkens more to decoration and nostalgia, and less to hierarchical power centers. This is Eugene Lovendusky, 31 years old, works in not-for-profit development here in New York City, and I just say, kumbaya, brother. This is an image from the LGBTQ+ makeout at Trump Tower in February 2017. It's a kissing booth, and I think that's Alt-Fact Kelly again. And you know, it's paper, cardboard, stencils, and paint. I just want to make a quick comparison. I want to look at the same concept, the same idea in the late 20th century. This is a 1990 kiss-in and protest at the Chicago Transit Authority. The CTA had banned this poster from being posted on buses in Chicago. This is Kissing Doesn't Kill from Grand Fury, 1989. I just want to quickly revisit some activist trends of the late 20th century, just to kind of heighten the comparison, and it does have to do with typography. I've mentioned the favoring of horizontal conversation among contemporary activist groups. Well, activists in the late 20th century embraced top-down, modernist, vertical conversation. For this bus poster, Grand Fury very blatantly copied Benetton advertising. This is another poster that was it was on Houston Street, called Welcome to America, also from Grand Fury. And up until just a couple of years ago, nothing had changed. This strategy of adopting this vertical modernist conversation was a strategy that was embraced by ACT UP, Grand Fury, National Women's Movement, WAC, and many, many other movements. The idea was make your work look super strong. The more activist work could imitate immensely influential advertising or appear to pose as systems of power, the more people would look at it, and the more people would take it earnestly. These movements, coming on the heels of 1960s and 70s radicalism, consciously moved their message and visuals away from the homier, handmade look seen in previous generations. This is the Vietnam War poster from Lorraine Schneider, which first appeared in 1966. In the 1980s and 90s, the activist viewpoint was such cutesiness would never be taken seriously. The demonstrations were organized to emphasize the aesthetic of one predominant message or theme. This is at a demonstration in front of the FDA The theme centered around Grand Fury's message, "The government has blood on its hands." To demand change, you had to play within the rules of big power. The goal was to get big power, for example, the pharmaceutical companies or government, to take you seriously. Messages and images had to carry authority. In 1989, Barbara Kruger created Untitled, Your Body is a Battleground. It was later used in 1992 as a poster for the Women's March on Washington. Activists were coached at big group meetings on what to say to the press to be sure all participants were passing on the same message. Such behavior mimicked successful strategies of major advertising campaigns. Notice the predominance of logos and official branding. You really don't see that very much today. And, as I mentioned before, this is a time when it was really hard to get typography. Today it's super easy, and it's much harder to sew a banner. Demonstrations were visual packages, a modernist top-down strategy, a hierarchical strategy, a vertical conversation, which went something like this. We, the creative, know what's best for you, our client, and the audience. This poster was created by the Silence Equals Death project in 1987 and basically functioned as a logo for the AIDS crisis. Likewise, this poster was done to give WAC, Women's Action Coalition, visibility at the 1992 Women's March on Washington. In other words, the poster was done to brand WAC. It also became the logo of the movement. Boom. Who knew? Who knew from that rich era of activism that the piece, which would translate into the aesthetics of 21st century activism, was the AIDS quilt? The quilt was very quietly, during its time, reviled by AIDS activists for taking the soft line, being too sentimental, too mushy, too celebratory of victimization. Today, from activists, there is a heightened interest in imagining new ways of being together, listening for the unspeakable. I didn't get that memo. On January 21st, my daughter and I boarded a Washington-bound bus at 6 a.m., posters in hand. My poster, clean, legible, modernism intact. That's the same Futura bold condensed used by Barbara Kruger and copied by Grand Fury. What was I thinking? I should have, crocheted the thing. Nobody gave a hoot about a legible message or nice typography. Anyway, again, the politics of the decorative arts comes to the fore. There's an enormous craft movement that considers their work craftivism. Their multifaceted motivations run the gamut from environmentalism to feminism to pipelines to immigration and more. I fondly call this piece "When Words Fail." I can't help but think of Gregory Schulte, who calls such methodology gifts of resistance. Gifts which refuse commercial appropriation and yet remain autonomously critical. Today's makers and audience, in blatant rejection of modernist authority, are much more interested in a conversation favoring individual voices and the mantra, collaboration, information sharing, problem solving, and conflict resolution. It's not that branding isn't understood. A group called the Pussy Hat Project posted a pattern for this hat online. Anyone planning to march could download a crochet, knit, or sew pattern for the hat on the project's site. Alternatively, some people made hats at home and sent them to the organizers to give away. A statement was made, but as you've seen, if anything had even the faintest aroma of power, capital, or authority, it was left behind, rejected. Speaking of rejection, We all know Hillary was a compromised candidate and that there were in actuality a multitude of issues which destroyed her. But I can't help wondering if this beautiful, perfect, modern, quote unquote modern, logo perhaps did not work in her favor. This is the Schweizer Bundesbahn SBB. It reeked of corporate entities. Corporations are not people. It smelled of gas, the fossil fuel industry, looking backward, not forward. And of course, the smell of money. Big business, mega corporations, banks, bad mortgages, Bank of America. And let us not forget the wheels of commerce. Perhaps the logo was too pungent, evoking too many memories. The sentiment was good, but people are making clear choices. They do not want their representation to reflect anything permeated by the bouquet of distrustful powers that be. I do like, if I make my uterus a corporation, will you stop regulations? So in conclusion, I want to leave with two questions. How do we as designers and typographers listen for and image the unspeakable? How do we encourage communication among and not to? But I'm going to give Sarah Wilson the last word. I still can't believe, I can't believe I still have to protest this fucking shit. And with that, I'm done. Thank you all.